We just finished talking about genotypes, and now we're going to compare that to phenotypes. The phenotype is the actual set of traits expressed in an individual, and it includes anatomy, physiology, and behavior. It's what we see, or the outcome of those genes, what those genes are coding for. Sometimes the phenotype is determined almost entirely or entirely by genes. For example, eye color is determined by the genes that you get from your parents. Environment can also play a role in how those genes are expressed. For example, they're looking at studies with identical twins to look at the role environment has on behavior. Another example are sea turtle studies. With sea turtles, the temperature during incubation of the eggs is what determines the sex of the offspring. So if you have the eggs at warmer temperatures, you will often get more female sea turtles than if you have cooler temperatures. Cooler temperatures will give you more male offspring. There is a pivotal temperature in which the male and female ratio will be the same. This should be a reminder from last year, but evolution can occur by artificial selection, natural selection, or random processes, and we're going to talk about all three of these in more detail. So, artificial selection is when humans are determining which individuals breed, and we're selecting for certain traits. For example, all domesticated dogs belong to the same species as the gray wolf, which is what we see up in the upper right hand corner. We have selected for size, we have selected for temperament, body shape, coloring. We even now have hyperallergenic dogs that we have selectively bred for, or artificially selected for. Other examples include livestock, cattle, pigs, chicken. The organisms that we eat or that we get food from, like milk from cows, often only come from one specific type of organism. Going back to the milk example, we get most of our milk from one type of cow, and that's because we have selected for cows that will produce a lot of milk for us. The picture on the bottom right, as shown right here, this is a wild mustard plant which has been selectively bred to give us Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, head cabbage, kale, and kohlrabi. Again, just choosing for whether we selected for the flowers, for the leaves, whatever it was we selected for, we ended up getting these different organisms. There are unintended consequences as a result of artificial selection, and mainly it comes from resistance. So just to give you a few specific examples, we are creating organisms that are resistant to certain herbicides. But what that means is that we're going to spray our crops with a lot of those herbicides, and the pests that we're trying to kill with the herbicides, through natural mutations of their own, increase the pest resistance of those organisms. The same is true with antibiotics and antibacterial cleaners. Bacteria are becoming resistant to these things. Now let's shift and talk about evolution by natural selection. This is when the environment determines which individuals are most likely to survive and reproduce. Remember, those with favorable traits will survive, reach sexual maturity, and pass those traits on to their offspring. So any combination of traits that increases an individual's fitness is going to be favored in the environment. Adaptations are traits that improve fitness, and you may have different adaptations in the same area. For example, in the desert, some plants have a very deep root system, so they can access water further down stored in the ground, and other plant species have the ability to store water. So whenever it does rain, whenever that area does get precipitation, those plants can absorb that water and they can store it for times of drought. Remember, we cannot talk about evolution by natural selection without talking about Darwin. So these are just some of the ideas that Darwin came up with that we now have supported. Individuals produce an excess number of offspring, so most organisms don't just produce one or two offspring unless they're going to care very greatly for them. They end up producing a lot more offspring than what will survive. And the thought is those with the favorable traits will be the ones to reach maturity, again, reproduce, and pass their favorable traits on to the next generation. The individuals produced are going to differ in their traits. Some will have traits that are more favorable than others, and differences in the traits can be passed on from parents to offspring. Differences in traits are associated with differences in the ability to survive and reproduce. Again, this is just kind of that main idea where those individuals with the favorable traits will be the ones to reach maturity, have offspring, and pass those traits on to the offspring. Remember, Darwin came up with his ideas after studying the Galapagos finches. So all of these finches were found on the different Galapagos Islands. They're all still finch species, but they are different based on their beaks, and their beaks were selected for based on what they ate. So evolution by random processes, and there is a image on the next slide that goes into this in a little bit more detail, so I would make sure you take a look at that. The random processes do not relate to a change in fitness. So again, mutations occur randomly and can add to the genetic variation of a population. So the larger the population is, the more chance there is to have mutations, which can be beneficial to the species. Genetic drift is the change in genetic composition of a population over time as a result of random mating. And this is especially important in smaller populations. Random events can most easily alter genetic composition for the next generation when you talk about a smaller population, because again, there's going to be fewer individuals that are going to be fewer individuals that will have the ability to reproduce with one another and produce offspring. The bottleneck effect is what happens when you have a reduction in the genetic diversity of a population caused by a reduction in its size. So think about an upside down soda bottle. Population size can be decreased by habitat loss, natural disaster, overhunting, or changes in the environment, and it can cause several problems. There is increased risk of disease and low fertility, and that makes individuals less able to adapt to future changes in the environment. The last thing is the founder effect, and this is a change in a population descended from a small number of colonizing individuals. So this is going to result in a different genetic composition than what the original population had. And again, tie this back to Darwin's finches, please. So like I said, this is an image that kind of goes through all of these different things. I would take a look at this on the PowerPoint because I know it got cut off a little bit right here, but I do like the explanations that they give you, and I think the images will help. Speciation and extinction also contribute to biodiversity. So we're going to shift from talking about microevolution to macroevolution now. Allopatric speciation is when a new species are created by geographic or reproductive isolation. So let's talk about these two things in more detail. Geographic isolation is due to the founder effect. So again, a subset of individuals from a large population colonize a new area that is physically separate from the original population. Connecting it back to Darwin's finches, Darwin's finches from the mainland got blown over to the Galapagos Islands, and as a result, they were geographically isolated from those individuals on the mainland. You can also have a similar situation happen with birds over a mountain, or if you have so again, continuing, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. If you have a storm that moves aquatic organisms to a new area, that would also be an example of geographic isolation. So again, we have a larger population that is getting split apart. Reproductive isolation is when organisms can no longer interbreed and produce viable offspring. So a lot of times this is in conjunction with the fact that they have been geographically isolated, but other conditions in which this may happen is, some change in temperature where some organisms survive and some don't, precipitation, or an introduction of predators. We just talked about Darwin's finches. And allopatric speciation is the most common method of speciation. The other type of speciation we're going to talk about is sympatric speciation, and this is the evolution of one species into two species in the absence of geographic isolation, and it occurs usually through the process of polyploidy, which is an increase in the numbers of the set of chromosomes. So again, increase in the number of set of chromosomes here. Most organisms are going to be diploid, meaning that they have two sets of chromosomes. One came from one parent, one set came from the other parent, and that's where you get the two from. Either accidentally or due to human intervention, the reproductive cells may have an additional set of chromosomes. And usually what happens with most organisms is if an organism has an extra set of chromosomes, that individual will not survive. There are some situations, however, in which survival is possible. For example, if we take a look at the wheat in the picture down here at the bottom, A is talking about a traditional ancestral form of wheat, and this has two sets of chromosomes, and you can see that the seeds are very small. In our second wheat example right here, and this is the wheat that we use to make pasta, there are four sets of chromosomes, and their seeds are a little bit larger. In the most common wheat that we have, which is used to make bread, this has six sets of chromosomes and it has the largest seeds. So as we increase the number of chromosomes in this situation, we are also increasing seed size. The pace of evolution. Now, we've talked for many, many years about the fact that evolution takes a really long time to occur. It's not something that we can see occur in our lifetime. We do see evolution taking place in organisms with really short lifespan, like bacteria, but human evolution and the evolution of most organisms, humans will never be able to see from the start to the end of their lifetime. There are four factors that influence the pace of evolution. So the first one is the rate of environmental change, and that is what's shown in A up at the top corner. So if you have a slowly changing environment, that's going to lead to greater evolution because it's giving organisms more time to adapt. And the reverse is true. The less evolution will occur if those changes happen very, very quickly because organisms will not have time to adapt. This is one of the concerns that we're having with global climate change, is that we're changing the environment too quickly and we're not giving organisms time to adapt. In the second example, we're going to talk about genetic variation. In this case, the more genetic variation we have, the greater evolution will occur. Because again, you have more options for those individuals to survive. In population size, the larger population is going to yield less less evolution. And this is going to happen because the more individuals you have, the more breeding that's going to take place, and individuals have a greater number of mates to choose from. So you may not be picking the mate with the most favorable traits because the population is so big you may not have access to them. Generation time is our last one that we're going to talk about. The longer the generation time, the less evolution that we are going to see, or the longer it's going to take is another way to think about it. And again, compare humans to bacteria. The lifespan of bacteria is significantly shorter, so we can actually see evolution taking place in that organism because its lifespan is so short. On humans, on the other hand, our lifespan is significantly longer, so it's going to take a really, really long time for us to see evolution take place because it takes us, 20 or so years just to even have one offspring. Now, continuing on with this idea of the pace of evolution, evolution by artificial selection is a lot faster than evolution by natural selection because, again, we're choosing the individuals that we want to breed, and oftentimes we can breed younger individuals. Evolution will also occur more rapidly in populations of GMOs. GMO stands for genetically modified organisms. We will continue with the rest of the PowerPoint in part 3.